Another day, another opportunity.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball. Today's team preview podcast has us looking at the Atlanta Hawks. Lots to talk about, a couple of breakout stars on the rise with this Hawks team. Michael Bolton.
Let's get to it.
Let's get to it indeed. To help me preview the Atlanta Hawks, I'll bring in the host of the Locked On Hawks podcast. Brad Rowland is back for another go at the team preview series. Brad, welcome back to the show.
It's my pleasure to be here. Always happy to talk some Hawks, and it's almost that time, man.
Yeah, we're getting closer to training camp. We're a few weeks away from things kicking back off. Of course, we've got the World Cup before that, but this Hawks team is very interesting. One of the fastest-paced teams in the NBA last year, which is always fantastic from a fantasy point of view. They're going to be challenged, I think, by the Pelicans in terms of who's going to be the fastest team this year, but there is a ton of value on this Hawks team with some real interesting guys to look at for this upcoming season. I start off these shows, Brad, by looking at guys who are injured and what there may be some updates there. Let's talk about Cam Reddish, who did have that abdominal surgery, core muscle surgery, which kept him out of Summer League. Is there any concerns that's going to keep him out of training camp?
Not that I'm aware of. There's been a little bit of rumblings that he is not quite cleared yet to return. You know, it's the summer, so teams are not convening in full effect right now. But all signs point to him being ready for training camp. It's definitely taken a little bit longer than expected for Reddish, which is certainly worth noting. But if he was not ready to go by, early October, I would be pretty surprised by that, even if he's not quite ready yet.
What sort of role do we envisage Reddish having this season? I think he's going to be coming off the bench, but he is likely to be a rotation guy straight away.
It's kind of up for debate. I think the other rookie, Deandre Hunter, is probably going to be slotted for a rotation role. But as far as Reddish is concerned, this sort of late start, slow start, missing most of the summer, and the fact that he was not a great college player, the Hawks would almost certainly have to sort of prioritize his development ahead of the actual team winning right now, because I can't imagine he would be the best option to play on opening night. But, when you're looking for a rebuilding team, you could be looking towards the future more than the present, and that could be leading him to play a little bit more. So it's kind of up for debate, honestly. I'm pretty sure that Hunter's role is fairly secure, but Reddish could be more of a slow start for him. I expect him to be in the rotation at some point this season, probably for most of the season, but I'm not sure if it's going to be opening night or not.
He's going to have to be fending off guys like Alan Crabb and Deandre Bembry into that backup role on the wing there. I think he can do that. I think that they'd want to see that from him. And he shot horribly in college. We all know that, whether that was the core muscle being the problem. But as I've stated repeatedly in this podcast, I don't think he can be a worse shooter than when he was in college, especially from 2-point range. I don't know how you can be worse than that. So there's not looking at it going, well, he's going to be that same guy or he's going to be worse. As many guys transition from college to the NBA, their shooting drops off. I just don't see how that's a possibility. He took a lot of threes and he got a lot of steals. And those things can be really interesting for fantasy. So if he found himself in a 23, 25, 26-minute role at any point, also I think he can also work a little bit as a ball handler in a second unit as well, which this team has exactly one point guard on the team. So that could actually help him as well. Can you see him running any point this year?
There was a stray comment from Lloyd Pierce, I believe it was during Summer League on a broadcast, about maybe trying Reddish at point guard. I probably wouldn't try that necessarily, but it wouldn't shock me if the Hawks did, frankly, just because he does have that reputation. I think the Hawks at least see that as a possibility for him. And like you said, there isn't really a primary backup point guard. They're going to go with Evan Turner for most of the season by all accounts, but that isn't a perfect solution. And if they think Reddish can handle that role, you might as well try it and try to unearth some of the upside that he has there.
Well, he received the kiss of death from the NBA rookies, saying that he's the player they think is most likely to have the best career. So in all inevitability, it means he's going to be bad because the rookies always pick the wrong player in all of those surveys. So that's not great news for Hawks fans. Let's see how he goes. But he's going to be an interesting guy if he does find himself in a role, getting those steals and hitting some threes. And as I said, I just don't see how he could possibly be worse in terms of a shooter this year than what he was last year at Duke. Let's talk about that other rookie you've mentioned already. Deandre Hunter looks like he'll profile to be the starting small forward, replacing Taurean Prince on this team. I've heard there's been some sort of debate perhaps with this Hawks team as to what sort of starting lineup they go for. Do they push Hunter up to the 4? Could Reddish start at the 3 and they play John Collins at the 5? I don't think they'll go that way, but how do you see them lining up?
Yeah, I'm with you on this one. I think Hunter could play some 4 in the future, or maybe even a little bit this year. But I think as a primary early on, he's gonna be the starting small forward. Part of that is just that he's by far the clearest option at that position. The guys he's competing with for playing time, most of them are either shooting guard size like Allen Crabbe and Deandre Bembry, or a little bit bigger than that, or Cam Reddish. I just think that Hunter is much more far along than Reddish is at this point in time. So 6'8" guy who could certainly play up a little bit in the future. But I think right now he's actually a better defender on the ball against perimeter players than he would be for in terms of just bigger physical players. And offensively, he's more of a catch and shoot guy. But at the same time, I think he's going to be playing primary small forward this year. You could see him in some small ball looks, but as a primary look, I'd be pretty surprised if he was starting at anything but small forward this year.
Yeah, that's how I see it as well. I think he's a little bit overranked on ESPN at 99, 147 on Yahoo. He's not a guy that put up great numbers in college in terms of defensive stats. In fact, they were remarkably low. Some of that is the system that Virginia ran, but also don't see him as being a high volume guy or an elite efficiency guy or a high rebounder or a good assist guy or a good defensive numbers guy. I think he's going to get the minutes, but that doesn't necessarily translate into good fantasy numbers, as anyone who has had his now teammate Allen Crabbe in the past would be able to attest to. So Hunter, I think, is a guy we leave for those deeper leagues. I'm not particularly high on him for dynasty formats, but the minutes will be there for him this season. Let's talk about a guy that I am pretty interested in for this upcoming season. And that, of course, is Trae Young, who started off slowly last year and finished red hot. I think that Trae Young is going to be a top 20 player this year. He's ranked 43 on ESPN, so there's so much value in drafting him in that 3rd or 4th round. He's at 20 on Yahoo. I think he can still beat that number. Over the final 2 months of last season, he was the 20th ranked player. He played 33 minutes a night and averaged 24, 5, and 9.5 with a steal, and did it while shooting just 34% from 3. So, Brad, I give you that stat line, 24, 5, and 9.5 with 1 steal. Is there any reason why Trae Young can't do that again while also improving that 3-point shooting percentage?
Yeah, I think it's definitely within the realm of possibility. I'd probably take the under on 24 points, but at the same time, that's not crazy to see that he could do that. He averaged 19 and 8 for the full season, even with the struggles that he had early on. I still think that he's a better passer than anything else. His assists are going to be sort of my favorite thing about him and the way that he passes and sees the floor, but he definitely can score. He's going to have the ball in his hands pretty much all season long. He's definitely the primary option in terms of creation on this team. And the shooting, I think, while I'm a little bit skeptical of his absolute upside as a 3-point shooter in terms of percentage-wise, the volume's going to be there. And I think, true talent-wise, he's better than the 32% that he shot last year, and probably even better than 34% that you referenced a second ago. So, 24 points might seem a little bit high, but, somewhere in the neighborhood of low 20s and 9 assists a game seems right on it for me. And that's obviously a pretty appealing player.
Well, for the last half of last season, he played 32 minutes a night in 39 games and averaged 23 and 9. That's a half a season. And again, coming on that was 35% 3-point shooting. Like that's only 23 points in 32 minutes. I think he'll play more minutes than 32 a game this year. Do you think that?
Yeah, I think so. Lloyd Pierce was pretty manageable on the minutes for Trae Young and a couple of other guys as well. I think there's probably a cap somewhere because they definitely want to be a future-facing team, and I think Young is a very clear part of that. But as we talked about earlier, he's kind of the whole game at point guard right now, so he's gonna have to play more minutes than this. I'm not sure how many more, but it's definitely going to be more than that 31-32 that he ended most of last season with. I would probably guess somewhere in the 34-35 range for this year. I can't see him being a 38-39 minute a game guy like some guys across the league have been, but certainly somewhere in the mid-30s, I think.
Yeah, that's how I've got him. I've got him at about 34 minutes. I think he pushes right to that 25-point mark and gets over 9 assists a game. And then if he adds that 3-point shooting increasing, but more importantly, if he goes from 1 steal a game to 1.5 steals a game, then he's actually going to be knocking on the door of the top 10 for fantasy. That's how good these numbers can be. And it's not saying that he's the 10th best player in the NBA. It's about opportunity. The minutes are going to be there. The usage is going to be there. The ability to get assists, to score, all these things are going to be there for Young. I don't see them going away, and that's what's going to put him right at the top. And I've drafted him in a ton of mocks in that 3rd round range as well, so you can still get value on him. I'm happy to pick him in the 2nd round as well. I feel pretty confident about Trae Young for this coming season. The other guy I'm pretty high on for this coming year is the Baptist John Collins, who Heading into his third year, I think it can also be a second round guy. ESPN's got him ranked pretty high, 17. That's a little bit too high. They've got him so high, far above Trae Young, which doesn't make sense to me. Yahoo at 29 means there's some value. Fantrax at 45, there's a ton of value. I think that John Collins is going to put it together now. He only played 30 minutes a night last season, Brad. So like Trae Young, how much more are we seeing from Collins this season?
I think it'll be somewhere in the same range as Trae. I would certainly pick Trae Young to play a little bit more than John Collins just because, point guard, the fact that Young's going to have that workload on his shoulders, and Collins is a very high energy player. The Hawks talked about it a little bit last year, him having to kind of play through it and play more minutes by earning them, not really with his play, but just being consistent and being able to keep up the energy that comes with playing that many minutes. I think 30 is definitely going to go up. That's where he was last season. I think it's going to be somewhere in the 32, 33 range for me. It could be more than that. He could certainly surprise me by playing a little bit more. It's definitely going to go up, and if he can maintain the efficiency and the energy, particularly defensively, which isn't the biggest part of his fantasy value by any means, but if he can play that well on the floor to just stay in games, because I think that's something that the coaching staff's looking for with John Collins, is being able to defend for that many minutes. If he can prove that he can do that, then they're going to leave him out there for even longer, and that means more numbers.
People look at his numbers from last year and they go, well, 0.4 steals and 0.6 blocks. It's a real deficiency in fantasy, and that's true. But the fact that he's efficient from the field and from the line, big rebounder, hits about a 3 a game, 20 point. I think he's going to be a 20 and 10 guy this season. But I think we've spoken about this before, Brad. I wonder if you remember the answer. But how many steals did John Collins have in 2018 portion of last season?
Wasn't it like one?
Yeah,
it was a very, very low
one.
number.
So talking like with Cam Reddish, we say he can't be a worse shooter. There's no way John Collins goes through a 3-month period of a season and has one steal again. So that is definitely bound to return or improve. His steal rate and block rate both cut in half from his rookie season to his second season. Now, maybe he isn't the same guy in terms of defensive numbers we saw as a rookie. I feel pretty confident in saying he's also not the guy that averaged 0.4 steals per 36 last season as a member of the Hawks. I think that's going to have to improve, or will definitely improve from where he was last year. So I think that we're going to see those defensive numbers at least come up to be respectable, and is going to put him into that second round range for this season as that high efficiency big man who's going to score, who's going to rebound, who's going to hit some threes, and most importantly, be efficient. So I think that they are two guys who have got tremendous upside to finish as top 25 players for this season. The other guy who is locked in as a starter is Kevin Huerter, who will start alongside Trae Young in that backcourt. We've spoken already about the lack of other guys to handle the ball. So to me, that means that Huerter is going to have to increase his playmaking. He can do it. He averaged three assists a game last season, 3.3 over the final 35 games of the season. And that's going to be his key. If he can get that to, say, 4 assists per game, then that's going to be the thing that pushes him into the top 100. He should have a more settled role. Only 27 minutes a night last season. Again, like Young and Collins, that's definitely going to increase, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Huerter wasn't even a full-fledged member of the absolute core rotation early on last year. Much like Cam Reddish, he missed a bunch of his rookie summer before his first season with an injury and got off to a slow start, struggled in the preseason. They kind of laugh about that now, but the fact that he had to kind of play his way into a full-time role, and he kind of benefited from an injury as well to Kent Bazemore that opened the door for him to play a lot more minutes. And I think, just like you said, he's going to be playing a lot of minutes. It would not stun me if Huerter plays as many minutes as Collins did this year. I wouldn't necessarily predict that, but somewhere in the low 30s for me would be where I would guess. He's certainly the less high-profile member of that trio, but they're going to need his shooting, especially on this team with a lot of the potential question marks that there are on the three-point shooting side, other places on this roster. His shooting is going to be valuable, and like you said, he's going to have a higher playmaking role. I'm not sure he'll ever be a primary guy where he'll have the ball in his hands all the time, but as a secondary guy, he's certainly the lead option alongside Trae Young. And if Trae leaves the court, if you were to pair Evan Turner and Kevin Huerter together, which is probably going to happen at times this season, I think Huerter as a lead ball handling candidate might have a pretty good case to be made to have the ball in his hands. So I think the shooting is his primary value. It's probably never going to change, but at the same time, he's always been an underrated creator, an underrated passer, and someone who I think is going to be playing a big time role this year.
Yeah, I can see him. Yeah, even this season, he could average 4 assists per game. I'm not quite sure he gets there, but I don't think he'll be too far off getting there, just given the fact that there are just so few guys who can be creators on this team. I do think that's going to be interesting to see exactly how he gets used on this squad. But I do think that's improving for him. He can be a top 100 sort of a guy. He's ranked way too low on ESPN at 180, so there's value in him there. Yahoo is at 101. That's about the right spot, I think, for Huerter. And I too agree with you, thinking he's going to get low 30s in minutes and be able to score well, hit threes and hit them efficiently, get a steal and get some solid assist numbers. So Kevin Huerter really is a pretty stock standard league player for this coming season. At center, Alex Len, I think we have to pencil him in as the starter at this point, but is that a starter in name only, a 23-minute-a-night role, or will he push up 27, 28 minutes? Because the backup situation's not great behind him, and that would require John Collins playing a lot more minutes at center.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a starter almost certainly at the beginning of the season. But like you said, it's not going to be a massive minute role for Alex Len. Last season, Dwayne Dedmon, who is a better player than Alex Len, averaged about 25 minutes a game. Granted, he had Alex Len behind him, and Len is a better player than the backups that he actually has on this team this year with Damian Jones and maybe Bruno Fernando, the rookie. So I think Len could play in that 25, 26 minute a game range. But even last year when Dedmon missed some time, the Hawks rarely pushed Len into that 35-minute a game kind of role, even if he was kind of the only option. They seemed to want to manage his minutes a little bit. You could see why. He's a massive human being. He's like 7'2", 250. He's a big-time guy who has to carry around a sort of a big frame. The shooting was encouraging from Alex Len last year, but defensively, they don't necessarily think he's a lockdown guy on that end of the floor either. So I think a bigger role than last year, almost certainly, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of where Dedmon was in terms of minutes per game. And, we'll see how he fares, whether the shooting is real. Last year, he shot 36% from three. I'm not sure that's a real number, but maybe it is. He looked pretty comfortable taking threes last year, and if he can sort of turn that into a real skill that's future facing, to go along with the fact that he's now easily the primary center and behind John Collins, the number 2 play finisher on this team around the rim when catching lobs and finishing from passes with Trae Young. There's some interesting upside for Alex Len. He's still pretty young, but until I see a center under Lloyd Pierce playing big minutes, I have to be a little bit skeptical of that.
Yeah, I think he's going to be in that 26-minute zone, which puts him at the back end of standard leagues, in that 11th round, sort of 12th round sort of an area. The three-point shooting is really interesting with him. As he shot more threes, he became a better shooter, which was really interesting. Over the final 25 games, he upped it to 4.5 3 attempts per game and hit 42% of them. And the end of the season, he had some games which were crazy. These are his last 6 games, 23-6, and that included 6 3-point attempts. 21-5 with a block, and that included 4 out of 5 from 3. Next game, 11-2 in 14 minutes. That's a foul trouble game, limited him there, but still got up 4 3-point attempts. 9-4 in 22 minutes with 2 of 7 shooting. 33-8 with 2 blocks and 6 of 12 3-point shooting, and then 20-10 in the final game of the season with 3 blocks and 2 of 6 3-point shooting. So just a ridiculous amount of 3-point attempts, massive volume from Len. And only 2 of those games were 30 minutes or above. So he can put up the numbers. I'm not sure if there's huge upside in Len, but he did start to really bring that 3-point shooting along, got more confident in it, and it started going in more as well. So that does make it pretty interesting to see where he's going to go as a starting center on this team. A guy that I have liked back to his Phoenix days and has always been in sort of suboptimal situations. Now he gets an optimal situation with players around him like Collins, with Young, and Huerter there as well, to see if he can actually do anything. And this is the opportunity for Len to at least have a crack at that and see where that goes. The Atlanta Hawks brought in Jabari Parker as a free agent. Of course they did. So he is now the backup power forward, I would guess. Getting minutes for Parker seems like it's going to be a little bit tough with Hunter, who can play up at the 4. Collins there already, Reddish and push into the wing minutes. What do you think the Hawks are looking at for Jabari for this coming season? Like, what sort of role is he going to be holding?
I think, like you said, he's going to be the backup power forward, at least in terms of his actual just pure role. It is very interesting to me, though, to see how many minutes he's going to play, because the big X factor is the fact that John Collins can play some center, but we're not sure how much he's going to play center, just because of the fact that the Hawks have been confident in saying that he's a primary power forward that can play center, but doesn't always going to do that. So that's the big swing. If Collins is going to play all of his minutes at the 4, that kind of limits the minutes for Jabari Parker, because, as you said, you might see some Hunter at the 4. You might see some Vince Carter. You might see other guys. You could even see Evan Turner there if he wants to play alongside Trae Young. There are other options at the 4. With that said, the Hawks did give him a pretty reasonable investment in Jabari Parker, a 2-year deal with a player option, which kind of signals to me that they like him more than most people do, including myself, honestly. But at the same time, Parker is someone who they like his creation, and when Trae Young leaves the court, they're gonna need some people that can kind of take up some usage. I think that's part of the angle here, is that Jabari can kind of just take the ball and be a primary initiator. Whether that's for other people or not is kind of up for debate. He's more of a scorer than anything else right now, but there's at least some upside in terms of scoring. But I am pretty skeptical of his role being that big in terms of minutes, just because I'm not sure you can play him with Collins, because Collins' defense is a little bit shaky, and Parker is a really bad defensive player, at least at this point in his career. So if you can't play those two guys together, I'm just not sure the minutes are going to be there for Parker. Even if he's pretty clearly the backup power forward, that could be a backup power forward playing 15 minutes a game though, rather than 22-23.
Yeah, it is hard to see exactly how that fits, and you're right, that Collins-Parker pairing would be pretty poor from a defensive point of view. Jabari's going to get his shots up, he's going to score, he's still more of that 14 or probably 16 team league guy. If an injury occurs, we know he can come out and throw up meaningless points as he did for the Wizards last season, but outside of that, he doesn't do a huge amount more than that for fantasy managers. Let's look at this backup center position, because it is pretty interesting. You mentioned Bruno Fernando, we mentioned Damian Jones. Who do you think gets first crack at being that backup center?
It's a great question. I tend to think that Damian Jones will be there early, because I tend to devalue rookies a little bit and just think that rookies, especially second-round picks, should be skeptical of those guys. And Travis Schlenk was in Golden State when they drafted Damian Jones. I think he likes Damian Jones, and that was part of the reason, at least, that they traded for him in the Amari Spellman trade. With that said, nothing would surprise me here. And when you factor in that Collins is also, could be some center minutes as well for him, I'm not sure either guy is going to be playing a big enough role. They could even split it. Lloyd Pierce went pretty deep in his rotation sometimes last year, playing 11, 12 guys in single games, even if they're competitive games. So I would lean Jones ever so slightly, but if you ask me to pick who plays more minutes during the full season, it might be Fernando, just because he is a rookie and the Hawks traded up for him. They like him a lot, and they might look to prioritize him if Jones is not playing all that well.
They've also got 3 guys from Maryland now on this team. I just did the Pelicans preview. They've got 5 Duke guys, so you're not quite at that level, but 3 Maryland players on this team: Herder, Len, and Fernando. Now, I think Fernando, much like you, will probably not be there initially, but will end up getting more minutes as the season goes on and play more minutes than Jones. He blocked a lot of shots in summer league, so that's interesting. He's a pretty strong rebounder. He's a huge unit as well. Big, muscly shoulders. Really shows a lot of strength. Now, will he develop in a three-point shot? Can he have any playmaking? I'm really doubtful about that, but an interesting, efficient center with good field goal percentage and free throw percentage is always something to keep an eye on. And he's a name down the stretch. If the Hawks are out of it, maybe he gets some starts in like March or April, just to see how he starts developing with these guys. It's something I wouldn't completely rule out.
Yeah, Alex Len's also an expiring contract, so if they were to look to potentially move on from him, I know he is pretty young, and I do like Alex Len, but they invested in Fernando, and if for some reason they were to move on from Len, or if there was an injury somewhere, Fernando would be a guy who could be in line for minutes, and rebounding at least might be interesting for him. He was definitely a big-time rebounder in college. I'm not sure on everything else, honestly, because he's still going to be raw as a rookie, but would not surprise me if he was playing a pretty big role in March and April.
Alan Crabb came over in the Taurean Prince deal. It's a struggle to figure out where he's fitting in this rotation. We've got Young, we've got Herder, Evan Turner's the backup point guard, and then your backup shooting guard, Cam Reddish, could be in the mix there. There's Deandre Bembry, who played a pretty big role last season. Where is Crabb fitting in here? Is he a rotation piece every night, a sub 20-minute a night guy? Because that's a pretty big drop from where he was in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I think if the season starts today, which we're thinking that it's probably going to be Crabb as the backup shooting guard, at least as a primary look. For me, at least, having Evan Turner, who is a non-shooter, as the backup point guard makes it to where you kind of need Crabb shooting. For instance, playing Turner and Bembry together might be a little bit of a struggle because neither one of those guys can really shoot it. Crabb is kind of only a shooter, but at the same time, he can bring that element to the table. And aside from Herder, he's kind of the only guy on this perimeter that we know is a knockdown shooter right now. I think Hunter and Reddish can certainly shoot it. We think they can, but they're still rookies. And there's some uncertainty there. Crabb is a proven, high 30s three-point shooter. So, on the flip side of that, Crabb was pretty much a salary dump. They took him on in terms of that trade. So I'm not exactly sure how they feel about Alan Crabb. He was not someone that they sought out to go after and acquire specifically. It was more that they were basically taking his contract on from Brooklyn. So, if the GM doesn't love him, if the coaching staff doesn't love him, it wouldn't blow me away if he wasn't playing a whole lot. But for me, I think I pencil him in as the backup shooting guard, at least to start the season, because they're just going to need a shooting.
Yeah, I think that's how I see it as well. But I don't think that he's a guarantee to remain in the rotation all season, because it could be Bembry. No. But if Crabb's in there, that is going to mean Bembry's going to struggle to get regular playing time after putting together a pretty strong season last season. So what's the Hawks' thoughts on Bembry and his future?
It's a great question. That's something we've been talking about quite a bit, actually, in Atlanta. Is just how this rotation shakes out. And for me, if I had to guess early in the year, he might be the 11th guy, and that makes it tough. In some ways, I know the Hawks like him. I know Lloyd Pierce likes him. He was very complimentary of Bembry last year. But as a guy who's entering his fourth season, his last year in his rookie contract, nothing is assured for Bembry long term. He wasn't drafted by this regime. He was drafted by the previous regime. And, he's not really a shooter. So if you factor in that Evan Turner is primarily going to be the backup point guard on this team, that's kind of the pseudo role that Bembry has been in at times. Not necessarily a point guard, but as someone who has to have the ball in his hands because he's not really a great shooter. He's a good defender. That's something that he has going for him that guys like Crabbe don't necessarily have. But Bembry is just sort of a weird fit on this roster right now, and because he's a little bit older, he's 25 already. He might just be on the outside looking in. I think they're going to probably try to find a way to play him at least somewhat regularly because they do like his tenacity defensively. But just with his skill set, it's easy to see how he might fall out of the rotation at times, if not just all the time.
Yeah, that's how I sort of see him as well. That he's going to be on that periphery there. And again, if they run with that Crabbe Turner backcourt, Bembry will be then battling Cam Reddish for minutes at the 3, and they'd probably want to prioritise Reddish in that scenario, making it hard to see Bembry as a necessary every night part of the rotation. Evan Turner is going to be this backup point guard. He did up his rebound and assist rates pretty considerably last season, and if you are in need of assists off the waiver wire to stream someone in, Turner could easily average 4.5 assists on this team in a regular role with no one else really providing that sort of value. But outside of that, he has so many more other struggles. But at least as a backup point guard who is going to have a solid role, we sort of know what we're getting from Turner at this point.
Yeah, I think that Turner is interesting in that as soon as they traded for him, they traded Kent Bazemore for him, the Hawks immediately went into spin mode and wanted to tell everyone that would listen that he's the backup point guard. And I believe that because he's kind of the only one on the roster. With that said, I'm not sure how this is going to work. Is he only going to play when Trae Young leaves the court? Because if that happens, he's down to a 16-minute a game, maybe even less role. But if they plan to use Turner as like a backup 3 or 4 at times, playing him with Trae Young, then that might open him up a little bit, even if it's not with the ball in his hands, because the problem with Turner is that he can't shoot. So if he doesn't have the ball in his hands, he doesn't have a ton of value. And if you're playing him alongside Trae Young, I can't imagine giving him the ball in those circumstances. So it might just be like a 14-minute a game role for Evan Turner. And if that's the case, then you probably don't want much to do with him. But if he plays more than that, and he certainly could if they fall in love with his skill set, it does make some sense. So he's kind of a weird fit. He's always been a weird fit, but if he plays enough minutes, you can sort of see what the appeal might be.
Just a reminder that he, Alan Crabbe, and of course Chandler Parsons, who's on this roster, make a combined $61 million for this season. So Chandler Parsons and Vince Carter just going to be sitting down the end of the bench. Carter started games last season. He played a significant role, but we have to assume that his role is smaller this year.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's definitely going to be the case, and we'll see. There's a lot of uncertainty behind Young and Herter, and I think Hunter. There really isn't a whole lot assured on the perimeter on this team. I'm taking some educated guesses right now from talking to people and just kind of using my own roster building. But there is some uncertainty, honestly, and I think that makes it tough. But it also makes it to the point where there's 2 or 3 guys who are clearly going to have roles, and everybody else could fall in and out of the rotation as the year goes on.
Yeah, that's sort of how I see it as well. I think we've covered most of these guys now. I'm just going to go through some value and bust guys. I think on ESPN, Trae Young at 43, ridiculous. There's so much value in him at that spot. Well, also on ESPN, they have Jabari Parker listed as the 105th best player. There is almost no way that he can get, even if he played 30 minutes a night, I think he'd struggle to get to that level, and he's not playing 30 minutes a night. So don't take Jabari Parker at pick number 105. Brad, tell everybody where they can find you on Twitter and about the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you asking. I'm at BT Rowland. That's ROWLAND on Twitter, and I host Locked on Hawks podcast. Usually have a lot of fun talking Hawks stuff. I tend to try to be as real as possible without being too fanboyish. But I did grow up locally in Atlanta and do have the history with the team and all that fun stuff. So hopefully the best place to get your Hawks audio content. So if you want to listen to the team, definitely a fun, exciting young team. I'm hoping to sort of grow alongside this young team and having a lot of fun doing it. So I appreciate everybody that wants to give me a follow and subscribe to the podcast.
Go listen to Brad over on Locked on Hawks. Brad, thanks for jumping back on Locked on Fantasy Basketball with me. And that'll do it for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Subscribe to this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and give me a 5-star rating. That would be very, very good. And on YouTube, hit subscribe, give me a thumbs up, leave a comment, and let me know what you agree and disagree with regarding this Atlanta Hawks team. Guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Trae Young.